that happened with all these countries. And that disappointment was that there was an unwillingness to really state out loud and recognize that fossil fuels need to be transitioned away from. And so the exciting thing that happened as a result of that was that the many countries who were willing to name name the beast of fossil fuels and name that this is something we need to move away from said we're going to come together and we're going to have a different conference. That doesn't mean we won't participate in COPs. It doesn't mean the other conferences we're not a part of are not important, but this conference will be about transitioning away from fossil fuels. And we are really excited to be able to have such close connections with some of the participants in in that conference that was just happening a week ago. My name is Sarah Wolf, and I work with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. And my dear colleague is Analyah Schlaeger de Santos. And Analyah is here with two of her colleagues from an organization called USCAN, and that stands for US Climate Action Network. I'm going to let them introduce themselves for a moment here, but thank you so much to Shontaé Cannon-Buckley, and also Nellie Bisram for for joining us here tonight to help us understand what happened at this conference and then what we can do now. Analyah, I'm going to hand it over to you for a moment.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Sarah. So yeah, I'll just pop us off and then I'll pass it to Shantae and then Nelly. So again, everyone, welcome. Thanks for joining on a Thursday evening. My name is Analyah Schlaeger dos Santos, she, her, and hers pronouns. I'm usually based in Minneapolis and I am still in Santa Marta. And I have been here too long and I am ready to come home. But this has been a wonderful experience and an honor and really exciting to participate in this first conference, which I'll tell you guys a little bit more about in a bit. But so as Sarah said, I'm the Environmental Justice Youth Program Director and Global Climate Justice Coordinator with MNIPL and Climate Justice Commons. I usually co-lead Youth and Power back at home. And then I also co-chair the International Committee, the International Action Team with USCAN. I also lead Shift Us, and I'm a member of DCJ as well, the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice. So I wear too many hats, and I don't have a head that's set up for hats, but I get the honor of being in a lot of spaces and kind of dancing in between. And for this conference, I was a delegate with the Afro Descendant delegation, which I'll talk a bit more about later. So that's a bit about me. I will pass it on to my dear Shontaé.
Oh, thank you. My name is Shontaé Cannon-Buckley. I am based in Buffalo, New York, on Onondaga land. I go by she, her pronouns. I am the Membership Relations Manager at U.S. Climate Action Network. And I'll tell you a little bit later about our organization a little bit more. But we are a membership org, and how we build power is through action teams. So Analyah is a co-chair of the international action team. I help to run regenerative economies and accountability with Nellie, who will talk after me. And I help to run the culture, healing, and peace building. And I also was on the ground in Santa Marta, and I was with the NGO delegation. And I'll pass that on to Nellie.
Welcome, everyone. I'll introduce myself. Analyah, do you want me to facilitate something right after? Okay, cool. So my name is Nellie Bisram, Nellie with a K, like me, like knock, silent K. Nellie Bisram, originally from Trinidad and Tobago. I've now been living in the U.S. more than half my life. So I'm a Trin-American, if you will. And so my work is, I wear many hats. One is CEO and founder of AHAM Education, where I also serve as the lead representative to the UN for the last 5 years, doing a lot of local to global and transnational work around in different sectors. But I like to say that our work is really about number one, what is the inner work of outer transformation, whether it's the mental health crisis, the climate crisis, or the social injustice we see in the world? And also, what is that? How can we embrace this challenge of environmental injustice or the climate crisis through a lens of healing people, all forms of life and the planet? How can we see ourselves in that crisis so that it's, when we talk about resilience, when we talk about healing, that we're part of that equation, and that we also include the voice of nature in that process. With the U.S. Climate Action Network, I'm the co-chair of the Regenerative Economies and Accountability Action Team. I was in Santa Marta, and it was, I'm still digesting, what I experienced. I think we'll talk a little bit about the takeaways, but one of the things we did was a mindful beach cleanup. The event was called We Are Nature, and this is kind of one of the ways we engage with local communities in these, high-level processes where you have talks. The intention is really about remembering that we are nature and remembering that dialogue without action is not the way to go. So we engage on the ground in ways that allow us to embody those practices. And Analyah thought it would be a good idea for me to facilitate a short practice as an opening with all of us here. And actually, if we could stop sharing the screen, because it's kind of nice to see the faces as we engage this way. We're already removed from each other by being virtual. So if we could just take a moment to acknowledge the physical bodies that chose to show up on a Thursday night when you could have been doing something else. So first of all, just acknowledging the humans here. And I want to invite us, if we're multitasking and if it's possible, to stop multitasking and to really just be present with all of us here. And even if your camera is off, the way that you can do that is through your sense of hearing. So really just listening to the sound of my voice, and I invite you to continue to practice listening deeply from your heart as others speak. Just really listening to the sound of the voice as a really simple mindfulness practice, if you will. And now feeling your feet. It's the end of the day for all of us. And just taking a moment to acknowledge what the body feels like now, or what it feels like to be in this body now. And then becoming aware of the body, becoming aware of this breath that breathes the body. So sensing into this breath as it's moving, in an in-breath and an out-breath. And giving oneself permission just for a moment to just be here. To not have an agenda, to not be productive. To just rest. Taking a moment to return to the memory, to the remembering that I am and we are nature. And so as the feet touch the ground, an awareness that this very ground upon which I am supported, that this very earth is made of the same elements of this body I get to inhabit in this life. And so no matter what is happening, I am supported by Earth, and I am Earth itself. And upon this next in-breath, just an awareness that this breath that breathes the body without effort, that does so quite miraculously. The breath was given freely to us. And the breath is shared with the trees, with the other forms of life. And in this one breath, we are all connected. And so remembering that this interdependence is what supports us, whether we remember it or not, whether we are aware of it or not. That this interdependence, this interbeing is a fact of life. And so having a sense not only of responsibility, but perhaps a sense that we can lean in and be enough because we are interdependent and because there's plenty of other beings doing good in the world. And we can rest. So I invite you to take one more deep breath in. And this time, let it really fill up the lungs, the back body, the side body. And then on the exhalation, just let out a loud sigh. So breathing in deep and exhaling. Okay. So I will leave it there. And if anybody wants to, just because the brain needs to integrate sometimes our experiences, you could either write something down. If it came up for you, feel free to write it down, or you can share in the chat anything, any form of reflection on just how you're arriving today. And I'll pass it back to Analyah or maybe to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Nelly. I appreciate you. Thanks everyone for participating. I'm gonna just looking at time, move us gently into starting to understand a bit more about why we gathered here in Santa Marta. And I'm gonna have Nelly, or sorry, Shontaé, if you're down to start. Folks know that the three of us are connected, and MNIPL is a member of USCAN or US Climate Action Network. And so we were here in this process wearing multiple hats, yes, but also in conjunction with USCAN, which is one of my movement homes and a space that I hold very dear. So I'm gonna pass it to Shontaé just to get us grounded a bit in what USCAN is, and then we'll talk a bit more about what the conference is.
Beautiful. Thank you. Um, so yes, I work for USCAN. United States Climate Action Network is the largest network of environmental and climate justice organizations in the US. With over 175 members, we represent a uniquely broad and experienced membership spanning national environmental groups, frontline communities, organizations, faith-based institution, academic institution, public health, youth, and policy experts, among many, many more. Our deep membership ensures that our work is grounded not only in technical policy, but crucially, also in the lived experience of those on the front lines of the climate crisis. Collectively, we build political power to ensure the United States delivers its fair share, which Analyah has talked about and will continue to talk about, and we love her so much for that, of climate action through domestic mitigation and global support. We fight for a future that centers people and working families over corporation and profits. We believe that it's essential to advance a just transition from extractive economies to one that's are regenerative and rooted in community care, cooperation, and love. And I'm so happy that it brings me and weaves me into meeting people like Nellie and Analyah. So that is a little bit about USCAN, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks, Shontaé. So as we go into this process, and again, I co-chair the International Action Team with USCAN. We served as co-leads, co-chairs of North American coordination for this conference. So on the ground, we were supporting that work. And in this context, North America is Canada and Mexico. And we know that North America includes more countries than these two, but I think with everything going on in the world, folks can understand why Mexico and Central America did not want to be part of North America for this. So we don't have too much time to talk about those ins and outs, but for context, for this Santa Marta conference, the North American context is Canada and the US. So we, as USCAN, coordinated North America alongside JTA, or Just Transition Alliance, two large networks that do a lot of work on relationship and really representation of folks that are working on climate crisis. So I'm going to dive just a little bit into what this conference was. Sarah, I don't know if you want to share your screen with some of those slides, and feel free to jump in, Sarah, if you want to get us grounded in that. Wait just a sec. Okay. Well, while you're pulling that up, I will dive into it. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. What a comforting background. Okay, so what we're here to talk about today, everyone, is the first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels. That is a huge deal. This was an exciting happening. It was historic. Like I said, I'm still here in Santa Marta trying to decompress and wrap my mind around all of the things that happened. But this conference was co-hosted by Colombia and the Netherlands. And what that really looked like, speaking frankly, is Colombia running the show for a lot of this, and the Netherlands making sure that it was possible and really supporting it in that work as well. So a little bit about what this was. It is also referred to as TAF, or TAFF, just transitioning away from fossil fuels, number one. It really sought to shift the discussion and build momentum for concrete solutions to end fossil fuels and the grip and chokehold that fossil fuels have on everything, but really on economies, legal frameworks, and energy systems. This was an invitation-only meeting. It felt like in a lot of spaces that we're seeing a lot of folks that we go to United Nations conferences with, that we are building alongside pretty frequently. Nellie and myself have been to, I don't know how many you've been to, Nellie, but I've been to the last 5 COPs, or Conference of Parties. I said last year was my last one, and yet I have to go to the next 2 because there's work to be done. But this year would be COP 31, and a large part of this, the impetus for this conference was because the Conference of Parties, the COPs, they're not getting the thing done. We're meeting year after year in a different country. It's exciting. It's monumental in some cases, but really we're still not able to get the thing done by way of the United Nations and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So this was the first attempt at gathering folks internationally to really discuss the actual problem, because it took forever for the United Nations to name that fossil fuels is one of the driving factors of climate change and the climate crisis. And so that fact in and of itself means that, we tend to go to those conferences to really make some transformational change happen. But if we can't even face the reality of the thing that's driven this, um, then we're taking steps back every year. So this was an invitation-only meeting. It aimed at solidifying and expanding what we're calling a coalition of the willing. And I'm going to add context. And again, everyone, the ADHD that lives inside me might have me jump around from here and there. So have patience with me. But the United States government is not part of the coalition of the willing. Doesn't matter who's in charge of it, we have not been a part of the coalition of the willing. So formally, our government was not invited. Nor do we necessarily expect that the US government will be a part of the willing for the foreseeable future. So this pulled together countries from all over, I think about 50, if I'm not mistaken. These countries assembled here represented 1/3 of fossil fuel consumption in the world and 1/5 of global production. So it was actually a pretty big part of the world, even though it was an invitation-only small conference. So here we made the steps to actually move forward considerably on reducing the demand for fossil fuels and to promote a just transition. Many people and countries gathered here were also part of highly vulnerable communities and frontline communities to the impacts of the climate crisis. This was a 2-day, it ended last week and it was over multiple steps. And it started with the the People's Summit. And I am confused, y'all, because there was the People's Summit and then there was the Assembly of Peoples. Not to be confused. And when we talk later about challenges, my first feedback is to never name the thing that we're doing the same thing, but it's separate events. So we started over 3 days participating in the People's Summit that was led by CAN International, Climate Action Network International, of which USCAN is a founding node, and DCJ, or the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice. And then there was a Assembly of Peoples. Shontaé, I think I got that order
You
correct.
did. So great. Continue.
It was ridiculous in the naming and confusing. And then there was a high level segment. And so we got to you got to be, for most of us, a delegate, and you had to be selected for different sectors. We participated in regional breakouts. So the first day we were all with North American based folks and organizers and different campaigns and networks, etc., for an entire day and focusing on regional issues. And then we were broken down into sectors, of which I was part of the Afro-descendant sector. And then the third day, all of us came together. Thank you, Nelly, for that clarification. Yes, subnational and parliamentarian meetings for local and regional government representatives, which Nelly will speak to as well. But then there was the high level segment, which brought together diplomats, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, academics, civil society representatives for direct discussions rather than pre-written speeches. The themes were really overcoming the economics of fossil fuel dependence, transforming supply and demand, and advancing international cooperation within and beyond global climate governance. So, we tend to think of this as the UN is the place where the decisions are made. This was strategically not a UN event. So the three main takeaways of this, and we'll break it down a little bit more. Thank you, Shontaé. Yeah, the People's Summit were the 24th, 25th, 26th. So last week, not this past weekend, the weekend before. And then there was the high level People's Assembly. So, and we will dive into this a little bit more, but the three main outcomes of this conference were that we developed or came out with a new science policy panel, which is called the Global Energy Transition Panel, which is led by scientists. Number one, number two, three work streams on what are called roadmaps for the transition, a just transition, that are supported by the Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs, Partnership and Global Energy Transition Panel. This is on macroeconomic dependencies and financial architecture and is supported by the International Institute for Sustainable Development and the Center for Economic Policy and Research. And then also on fossil fuel free trade systems, so supported by Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And then one of the other biggest outcomes were that, again, this was number one. They announced that there will be a second Transition Away from Fossil Fuels conference, which will be co-hosted by the countries of Tuvalu and Ireland, which will take place in Tuvalu in 2027. They did not give us a date. It's just at some point next year. So we will let y'all know when we hear more about that. I'm gonna pause just really quick and we will discuss this a bit more. But Sarah, do you wanna lead us into what happens next?
Yeah. Oh, I thank you so much. This is great to have this conversation. And one of the first questions I'd like to ask all of you is whether you had any aha moments during this conference. And that could be about anything. Um, I'm interested in getting a flavor of when we're talking about this transition, what are the biggest barriers? And is that different from place to place? Um, so that could be a separate question. So I'll leave it to you for that. But if we could go around and let me know, like, what was something that hit you, struck you, and
Yeah,
then
Nelly, Shontaé, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I have never been interested in COPs or Conference of the Parties or like bond or anything where like policy. When this conference came with just transition and really thinking about breaking us off into sectors of like youth, Afro descendants, indigenous, women, and like really breaking those down into papers and like people. Like I'm down for people. We'll never have the money, but we can have the people to move the system. We have the people power. So that excited me. Like this is my first time going to an international thing. This is my first time like being involved in the process. And it just felt like we could, one, relationship build and really like organize around a just transition that looks like it involves workers, it involves everybody on the ground. And as Nelly said, that it's really also thinking about the people who can't be at these meetings talking. The barriers are different. We are in the US, they are the biggest barrier. So it's important to also be at these conferences, but also not like, you need to be talking about the US. You need to like they know that. You need to be talking about global north. You need to be talking about the global south. You need to be talking about fair shares. And so y'all have Analyah, so I hope that you like use her as a resource because she's doing great work. And in the fair shares is really, and we're talking about reparations. We're talking about rematriarching, yeah, really like taking care of the land and the people. And you can't do one without the other. And it was a time for folks to be at the table. And of course, we're going to have some like um, some differences, but hoping that we continue to build on the work that we've done, continue to talk about our demands, and I'll throw some of these in the chat, but I'll let Nelly talk a little bit about her aha moments and barriers. But biggest barrier is the US government. So how do we organize outside of them? That's what I'm excited about.
I think we can dig into that a little
Yeah,
more, but let's go to Nelly. Yeah.
yeah. I would say something that's been enduring is and validating for me is how much, we did a practice in the opening, and sometimes people say, oh, it's nice to de-stress before we talk about these hard things or do this hard work. And what's enduring for me is how much recognition there was that the state of our being fundamentally is what will move this process forward, even when we have all the right things on the page. And that was evident to me both in instances where we were in a very sort of holistic way of recognizing that we are nature, we are the land. It's not about just demonizing oil and gas. It's really about extractivism. It's about care. It's about allowing life to regenerate herself and recognizing the ways in which humans might get in the way of that. So being in a space where that was the baseline sentiment felt really good. And also being in a place like that where we are human and some of the ways in which we've assimilated all of the things we don't want, the patriarchy, the ways in which we may show up with aggression or in harmful ways unintentionally. I'm just being really real here. That was also a reminder for me that the ways in which we are showing up and that individual work that we all do on ourselves has to be fundamental to the process. And in many ways that was hidden. There was a group there that was addressing that. They had listening circles and there were several sessions, especially when there were indigenous groups or the Afro-descendants delegation present, because that is the way we are able to move through and do this work, that was centered. And I feel like that is echoing more and more in this space because it's about care. The other thing that I'll say that kind of this is taking from what Shontaé was talking about is with respect to a barrier. I see both as a barrier and an opportunity. When I attended the pre-meetings and the People Summit, and then for the Assembly of the People, there was like a smaller subset of folks who were selected to go to that. Unfortunately, I was not, and as a result, I ended up in the subnational and parliamentarian meetings, which I was not supposed to go to. I do play a role in my local climate task force, so under that role, I was allowed to attend those meetings. They were closed-door meetings. And what struck me immediately was I had just spent 3 days listening to people talking about needs and talking about the paradigm shifts that need to happen. And all of a sudden, I'm in an environment with folks who are mayors and parliamentarians and, in city government and what have you, that are trying to solve very practical problems, and how different their language was or their focus was. There was a common thread there of care and understanding, some of the things we've been talking about. But what became very apparent to me is that there's still some work to do around bridging kind of the different stakeholder groups and the ways in which we talk about the same things, but we often miss each other because we're talking about it in our own jargon, right? So that was something that became very apparent to me, and the opportunity that I see, and I was fortunate enough that one of the roundtable discussions I was in, the Colombian Colombian Minister of Environment came and sat right next to me. I didn't know she was coming. And then she started to talk about this too. She started to talk about the opportunity that we have, that even though there are state actors, governments who are not supporting this process, that, in that context of subnational governments, by the way, the California EPA policy director was present and spoke, and I recorded her with her permission. We had mayors from Quebec and other cities in the world who were applauding the work that not only the California government, but other small governments around the U.S. are doing in the absence of our federal government. So what I saw emerging and what I'm like looking at is this new multilateralism that's emerging in the vacuum of state-led action or state-led sort of political will and responsibility, and how fortunate we are to live in a world where that is possible now because of communication. And so that idea of micro multilateralism, if you will, that is across state lines with like-minded agents working together whether it's like-minded government. You know, there's a Resiliency Cities initiative of 100 cities in the US. There's something called C40. I learned there's a coalition, under two coalition, which is global, which are cities around the world, states around the world and regions around the world that are aligning around under 2 degrees carbon emission, degrees increase in climate. So I'm hopeful about that. And this kind of micro multilateralism, by the way, is also happening in civil society because communities are talking together. The Afro-descendant delegation is possible because of that, right? Because it's global, but it's also hyper-local. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Nelly. Thanks, ladies. I think the biggest aha moment for me was, well, it was consistent, and I got reminded over the entire time that this conference was happening, that everything comes back to relational healing. We are here, we have gathered in Colombia for a policy, I mean, kind of like a policy conference, right? And we are really discussing how, as Nelly said, you know, we're stepping into multilateral, multinationalism in a different way. And we can make as much progress on those things as we may, given the constraints and given context. But what was constantly in my face and in a lot of folks' faces was that we don't, as a collective movement, we don't take the time to do relational healing. And that's the really hard work. We can come together for 31 years, my entire lifetime, at the United Nations and try to come up with a way to address the climate crisis and how it impacts people. But if we don't take the time to actually heal relation with one another and with our surrounding environment, what are we doing? And it was like, you know, we're in spaces for the first time. I was a delegate with the Afro-descendant delegation. This was the first time that people of African descent were a formal delegation in the International Climate Fora. And I just want to stop right there. This was the first time, and there was 11 of us internationally. We had to get selected to do this. It was an honor and a blessing, but that in and of itself, yes, the Mindful Beach cleanup was a wonderful place to start on relational healing. But like that aspect in and of itself, we have never been represented in this space. And so, you know, for me, like a big part of what that experience looked like in the first forum officially was that, like, how do we show up in a way that really it makes it clear how that we're embodying right relation? And especially as a new delegation, whereas people of African descent are not a new happening, we're not a new people in the world. But this is the first time we got to actually um, negotiate on our own behalf and represent ourselves on our own behalf. And that was an honor and a blessing. And also, like, because I hold many positions and I'm honestly a part of too many orgs and initiatives, and it was really difficult and challenging being both a young person, so trying to support youth, and also negotiating, or excuse me, being Afro-descendant delegate and supporting North American coordination, and then just trying to not pass away from heat stroke every day. It was a challenge. And being a woman, you know, I can't even go to the women and gender delegation because that's too many identities and you have to choose a sector and a region. So, you know, like for me, I think that the fact that we can make policy around what we have to do to achieve and begin to move towards a just transition ultimately lies multiple steps back in how do we know each other? How do we have shared collective demands? How do we, you know, break down some of the barriers that keep it so that we have not been successful on implementation of actual transformational change? Those are the things that feel like the connective tissues, if you will, that, you know, as we move into what the next iteration of this conference is, which I found out I'm going to be at, don't know when, but you know, as we move into what's next, I think that that was the biggest lesson for me, and that is my reason for being on this planet. And so it's like you got to take your organizer hat off a little bit and really step into just being human and being a part of right relation. And I think that that was painfully obvious throughout this entire process. Sarah?
Okay, wow. So much there. Um, oh, thank you. I'm I'm narrowing in on three pieces that I don't know how to weave together. And because, we're all together for approximately 15 more minutes, I'm going to say them out loud and ask you to kind of respond to what speaks to you in that. The first piece is I heard you say, what's the biggest barrier? The US is the biggest barrier. And so you're all figuring out how to work outside of what presents the US barrier. Um, and I think we could all name many ways in which the US is being a barrier. Um, Particularly in this administration, but I am curious, whether it's for now or another conversation, if there are aspects to that that aren't so obvious that we need to know about. Like, what are the things that the US is presenting, that the barriers that that we might not immediately think of, but need to know about? That's
Yeah,
one
I
piece, and
may.
I could stop
First
there.
one,
Oh, sure.
yeah, like the first
Yeah.
one. No, but ask your three because I was like the first one. Our government doesn't believe in climate change. You know what I mean? First one. But Sarah, ask your three so we could.
Well, and it might be too much, but I mean, talking about bridging the stakeholder groups, Nellie, and how you can come from a conversation of care, and then that seems to shift when you get the policymakers in the room, and that tone somehow shifts. And and I'm very curious, like, how do we keep that from happening? What are your tips for keeping that from happening, which may or may not be
Mm.
related to the first part? And then we need to know about the collective demands, right? We need to hear about that before we leave. And there's probably so much more, but I'm gonna see how you want to respond to those
I,
pieces.
I feel like I have one answer to all three.
Okay.
Uh, so let me see if I can convey this in the way it's kind of landing for me. So I would say that um, the U.S. is not just made of our government; it's made of people, and the government is made out of people, made up of people. The different stakeholder groups are made up of people. The collective demand is based on the demand of the people, and I think when we are facing a challenge like this one, and we're operating from in our own sort of worlds of, I kind of talked about this before, of our own jargon, and, we have the solutions half baked. And so we go into these meetings and we have our talking points, or we're meeting with government. Like I live in the state of Florida. While we were in Santa Marta, I just found out today that they just passed new legislation that forbids any government agency from paying for or putting money into any net zero initiatives. So we now got to undo our climate action plan. It's a mess. But what we came back to was, this is about people. It's about our health. It's about our well-being. And I think sometimes we go into this autopilot mode of our talking points, and we forget that fundamentally this is about human life and well-being. The planet can do without us. The planet isn't waiting for us to save it. The planet will shake us off like a bad rash, as Sir Ken Robinson said, right? And we'll be just fine, like what happened during COVID. But I think what I see, especially whether I'm working with community or working with, diplomats, is that if we could remember that in every interaction, we have an opportunity to connect with the other as a human. And we need to be skillful in finding the ways to do that. We need to be willing to step away from our talking points. We need to be willing to ask ourselves, what in this experience will help me to connect to this other human being? Because I know that fundamentally, Trump wants to breathe clean air. I can tell you that even though he doesn't care about climate change, he wants to breathe clean air. And I know that's a lot to digest right now. But every human wants fundamentally to have the same rights. And it's not always easy, but there's always a place where those shared values can meet. And so I want to leave you with this. There's something called the Global Ethical Stocktake, which I invite all of you to take a look at. And it was launched by the Brazilian COP presidency in collaboration with Mary Robinson, who's a former Irish president, and I was involved in that movement. And it opened up an avenue for conversations around shared values, where people of different faiths, indigenous, different political persuasions can just come and talk about what it is we care about and to find a common language so that we can speak in our spaces that may be polarized or difficult. So I'll just leave it there.
We're not gonna get through all of our demands. And if we have all your information, as soon as they say we can send it out, because there is a sheet and I have a little access to it, but I don't know if I'll confirm if it's ready to go out. And so then you'll be able to read the demands because we won't get through all of them right now. Um, Here's the hope, right? Right. I'm a little bit of an opportunist. I'm not an opportunist. Ooh, that's the wrong word. Word. Oh, I'm an optimist. Optimist.
Optimist.
Oh gosh. I have to believe that we can win, right? Uh, I do this work because I believe we can win. Right now, our rights are being stripped. You are seeing them redistrict in a new Jim Crow. We have to fight back. You need to be in your communities. You need to be having conversations. When you see these demands, you need to weave them into your life. I don't mean like you have to be out and pushing people down and anything like that, but I'm like, you need to be having conversations with your neighbors. You need to be building people power so that when we are like ready to get together, right? Like May Day, like, you know what I mean? Like, stop buying for a day, right? Like we're not asking for our stuff. We're just like moving. Those are the things that we can do together. Those are looks like worker rights, community rights. Start planning in your community how to take care of your neighbor. Start like reallocating your like, I know money is going to get tight and all these things. It's just like, how do we start continuing to build and uplift our youth in our communities, with our neighbors? And like, how do we have deep conversation across lines? And I do get it, right? He does want to breathe clean air, but sometimes what you want in money it outweighs, and we have to stop letting people and their money outweigh what's good for our future generations and the planet and all those things. And because we are going to go, that was my 2 cents. I will send out the demands that we all came up with. I'm just going to confirm that it's ready to go out to, and then I'll have Analyah send it off, and I'm gonna.
I've been sending that to people,
Oh, okay.
not not publicly sharing, but they had to scan a QR code, so I was like, I assumed we adopted the People's Summit Declaration. Thank you.
He did. You know what? So
Yeah.
yeah. So Analyah, if she
I'll
sent
drop
it
it.
out, she'll continue to send it out, and I'm gonna be quiet.
I'll drop it. And maybe don't like post it on social media, I guess, until we get a confirmation. But so thank you so much, Nelly and Shontaé. Yeah, we with 1,000 other organizations worked tirelessly and at points ridiculously to determine the People's Summit Declaration. So it includes our demands. At a certain point during this conference, keeping it real with you all, I was like frustrated and just adding things directly in, and as they pertain to youth, Afro descendants, women and gender, North America, um, et cetera, et cetera. And so, to be exact, if you look eventually at, for example, section 4, our demands, number 10, um, I edited the heck out of that one because we go into these climate spaces and we use words like should. global North countries should do the right thing. We should come to the table. We should, we should, we should, we should. And I'm actually sick of that word. I cannot support that idea anymore that we should do the right thing. And I didn't talk too much about it, but I lead the U.S. Fair Shares work. And we're being asked to come to this table because our country and other global North countries do not do our fair share. Period. We do not. So a big part of what the actual takeaways of this conference are is that if we know that countries like ours are not going to be a part of the coalition of the willing, what does it look like for us to do the really hard work of cultural change? The U.S. Fair Share's work now is called Shift Us. What do we have to do to shift the U.S. as the largest historical emitters, as the country with the highest capacity to address all of this? We account for a significant amount of global emissions, and we have done the most damage. And I say we, recognizing that I'm part of multiple communities that have contributed the least to the climate crisis. And yet we bear the brunt of it. And I'm still saying we because I also benefit from, and I live in the United States, as it were. And this is not an attempt to shame all of us, but it's actually an invitation. And so I think that this process was ultimately a huge invitation, very complicated, very technical in some places, but also a space where a lot of us have gotten to the most technical part of this conversation that we've maybe not been in before, especially, for Afro-descendants having been the first delegation for the first time. So this is ultimately an invitation to shift our culture. And we do that, as Nelly said, by, our local communities and our local work and faith communities. And as Shontaé said, like actually working on addressing real life experiences, the climate movement we tend to focus on, and I say we because I'm a part of this, right? We tend to focus on certain aspects of climate, whereas, how can we actually expect people to participate when they're not sure where their next meal or where their housing is going to come from? And so it's actually not an option anymore for us to just focus on emissions when this actually pertains to culture shift. And if you go back to the demands, you'll see a very specific line that says global North governments must have the political will to provide for climate finance, and that includes direct community access. That was me a little bit rage typing, and it got adopted. So I'm like honored to have been a part of this declaration and these demands. And Shontaé and I were up till midnight with the other folks synthesizing all of this, and it was insanity inducing. But we have shared demands. So what do we actually do with those demands and how do we turn them into our culture? And that is what's being asked of us by the entire rest of the world. That is the invitation. I'm able and down to talk more with all of you or your networks about what has to happen for us to do our fair share. But we have all of the materials. We have the capacity. We owe a lot by way of reparations and repairing harm. So it's not just about, us deciding now and moving forward that we have to phase out fossil fuels, but it's also about looking back. What do we do about the harms that have been caused and continue to be, oh, thank you, Nelly. You're gonna make me cry. What do we do about the harms that have been caused? And also, how do we not make more harms? We need a fossil fuel treaty, which is what the second conference will discuss. And it's actually, I don't know if states are allowed to endorse, but I know that the Ponca Nation just endorsed the treaty. So like I think a lot of our next work in Minnesota and at nationwide could really look like how do we get to encourage and invite our local communities and our representatives to endorse a fossil fuel treaty as a starting point. And that's a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So no more new fossil fuels, right? But then also, how do we make it a culture and make this part of our DNA that we address the harms that have been caused in whatever way we can, because it's not good enough for us to just say we'll talk about it at the next conference. We actually have to do that now. And this conference really showed that a just transition is already underway, which is a blessing, and it is a constant invitation to do really hard work. So I'll stop there and maybe pass it back to you, Sarah, just for a closeout.
I don't think there's anything we can say to add or top that, except thank you so much to the three of you for being there in Santa Marta, for staying up till midnight and beyond, for rage typing, and for bringing back to us this inspiration about how we interact and something that's so huge, but how we need to think about bringing it back to just every human interaction that we have. What an honor to be with you, Analyah and Shontaé and Nellie tonight, and all of you who joined us. Be on the lookout for follow-ups, the demands, and also more invitations to be part of discussions to move this work forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nellie and
Thank
Shontaé
you.
and Sarah.
This was great.
Have a good
Thank
night,
you very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.